our body has so much wisdom, and it is reminding us to slow down. But again, we override that so much, and that's where in time we get to a place like you shared where the injuries happen, or when we start to get sick or have chronic illness, things like that, because we're ignoring the messages. And in the past, I would say 4 or 5 years, the amount of times that I've actually gotten sick is far less than ever before in my life, because I've started to honor like when my body is giving me even those little signals of, oh, like my throat has, like my lymph nodes are a little bit inflamed, or I feel a little bit more tired. And usually it's like, well, I'll just bypass that. But the more that I listen to that and honor that, I don't get sick very often because I'm listening.
That was Natalie, and this is episode 68.
Welcome to the Brave Woman Podcast. I'm your host, Tanya Lynn, founder of Sistership Circle and author of Open Your Heart and The Art of Leading Circle. I'm the mother of 2 girls, an 8 on the Enneagram, aka the Challenger, happily married to my business partner, Brent, love connecting with nature, and have put in well over 10,000 hours circling with other women. On this podcast, we will explore how to embody the brave woman so that you can take action on your dreams and desires, unapologetically speak your truth, and live life on your own terms. Grab a seat and a cup of tea, and let's get started.
Hello, sisters. We've got an incredible guest today. I was actually just at her book launch. She has a new book out called The Feminine Way, and I am excited to introduce you to Natalie. And we're going to roll up our sleeves and talk about how do we really live in the feminine? What does that even mean? It's something that we're all wanting, that we're all desiring, but sometimes it can feel very mysterious. So welcome, Amy. I'm so excited to have you here.
I'm so excited to be here. I feel like this is a long time coming. I loved having you as a guest on my podcast, The Feminine Frequency, a few months ago. And like you said, before we were recording, we're like, oh, this feels like a really good time to drop in to have this conversation. And I mean, here where I live in Asheville, we're in fall, but going into the winter season. And today we'll be talking a little bit more about like how to honor the different seasons and cyclical living. And I think that's something that we have long forgotten in our Western consumerism, capitalistic society. And so, yeah, today my intention is really to offer like a remembering. That's really with the book as well, is like none of this is brand new. These are concepts that when we hear them, or at least what I've found for myself and my clients is when we hear these principles and concepts of connecting to the divine feminine, it's like this exhale. It's like, oh, like I knew that, but I haven't been implementing it, or I haven't heard it in that way. And so I'm excited to see what opens up for our listeners today.
Yes. Oh, it's this is such an important conversation, because what I'm finding is how many women are feeling so overwhelmed and so in the grind and just in this constant doing. And it's like this kind of keeping up energy that we kind of get sucked into, and that there's a whole different way in which we can operate. That is just a remembrance of really the feminine way that to live that we've just gotten disconnected from. So let's talk about cyclical living and what that means, and where this has even come from.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so our culture we live in a hyper masculine, hyper productive society. And what that lends to is kind of this idea that we are linear, that we should always be growing, we should always be getting to the next step, we should always be productive, and that there is no room for rest, that it is bad to rest, that if you're resting, you're lazy, you're unproductive, you're falling behind, you're not worthy, right? We have so much of our self-worth wrapped up in what we do and who we are in our like external identity. And what I found in my own experience is that even when I've reached those standards, whether it's a way that my body looks or a certain amount of money that I'm making in my business or my relationship status, I was married, in my 20s and really had all of the things. And still there felt like there was something missing inside. And, my health was really struggling because of it. I was 27 years old and diagnosed with extreme adrenal fatigue and massive hormone imbalances and autoimmune symptoms. Like, this is what so many women are struggling with. And I believe that it's because we are living in a very imbalanced way. We're living in this constant hustle, linear way. And when we talk about living in the feminine way, initially when you hear that, you might think, oh, well, I need to go all the way to the other side where I'm just relaxing and I'm doing self-care and I'm not doing my to-do list, which of course feels extremely unrealistic because it is. Like, that's not necessarily the direction that we're going. We're looking to find more harmony and more balance, you could say, between these two energies of the doing and the being. And that's hard because we're so programmed to be in the doing. So that's a little bit about the direction that we're going. Was there anything you wanted to add before I go into cyclical living?
Yeah, because it's like we go into these extremes. And so we think, oh, well, I have to let go of doing altogether. And for me to live in the feminine means that I just need to go way over into just the being. But it's about, we have to still take action. And so I love that you brought that up, because we just, that's imbalanced,
Mm-hmm.
right? Yeah.
Yeah.
And so
And
there's a way in which we can integrate, and that's the cyclical living. So yeah, why don't you share with us what that is?
totally. And I've seen with many women that I worked with who are in corporate careers or who are caregiving for a family member or just like gotten to that place of extreme burnout. And that does require a big swing into the feminine for recovery. So it depends on where people are at. Like, there are going to be times in your life where that recovery is really essential and where going mostly into the feminine is what you need. And I had a client that I was working with who she gave birth to, I think it was her third baby. And within a week of giving birth, her inner critic was being like, you're lazy, you're not doing enough, you should be doing more. And I think we can all relate to that, where we don't give ourselves, or can't, like, we really uncomfortable with slowing down, and we feel like there's something wrong with us. There's shame around it if we're not doing something. I'm like, you just gave birth. Like, that's a big deal. Right. And similarly, I had another client whose father passed away. And I think as a business owner, which she was, there was this fear that if I take this time for myself, then everything's going to go away and nothing's going to move forward and I'm going to be struggling. Right. And what I've found is that when we actually honor rest, when we acknowledge rest for what it is, it doesn't mean we're moving backwards. It's actually very productive because it allows us to come back stronger. It allows us to come back more focused, more productive, and from an aligned place versus from this, I'm not fully feeling energized. I'm not feeling like myself. I'm still processing a lot of grief or a lot of emotions. My body's still healing, but I'm going to push myself to get back faster. And we all know that, like, that usually ends up staying sick for longer or being more depleted. So having that reverence for rest, knowing that it actually is part of the process, and instead of resisting it, if we can really embrace that, that's what we're looking for here. So there's different ways that we can tap into our cyclical nature as women, which we can go into. But I really wanted to bring that home about this permission to rest, and that it's not lazy and it's not bad or wrong if you do that.
And that recovery piece, because if we have been pushing for years, there might be that point when you need to recover from that chronic overdoing and the chronic burnout and the chronic adrenal fatigue. So I love that distinction. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and
Okay.
this shows
Yeah.
up everywhere. It also shows up with exercise. I grew up as a dancer and as an athlete, and at the time when I was diagnosed with adrenal fatigue, my naturopathic doctor was like, "I need you to do less intense exercise. Like running is not an option right now. High intensity exercise is not an option right now. Like we really need to dial it back to give your adrenals time to heal and strengthen so that you can come back into vitality." And that was really hard for me. I was like going on a walk and I was like, this is not exercise. Like, this cannot be exercise.
Oh my
And it
God.
was
Yeah.
so interesting because when I was in that adrenal fatigue space, my body was holding on to weight. I was exhausted. I was doing all the exercise, but I wasn't getting the results. And as soon as I really surrendered, which took me some time to accept where I was at, when I surrendered to where I was at, it was like, oh, my body, it was this exhale. Like I lost weight. I felt so much better. My energy started coming back. And yeah, I think that we go through cycles where we're not always supposed to be doing the same exercise, even in our menstrual cycles as women. Like we're not meant to be doing high intensity exercise for 28 to 31 days of the month. Like that's not how our body is wired. Mm-hmm.
I literally just had that exact thing happen where a couple months ago I got injured, and I love my HIIT workout, but that injury was Tanya, you've completely overdone it. It's time to shift your exercise routine. And so I shifted over to Legree, so which is like a Pilates based,
Mm-hmm.
and it has just been a game changer. And I'm noticing how, because the movement is so slow and it's about like how long can you hold this and how slow can you do the movement, it's like a total reset for my nervous system, and like the core strengthening is just so, it just feels like it's such feminine exercise. And
Mm-hmm.
yet it's like, I'm not running, I'm not doing cardio, yet I'm still feeling like the rejuvenation from shifting my exercise routine. So I'm so glad that you just brought that up. Yeah.
Yeah, I love Pilates. I love bar classes. I love walking. And more recently, honestly, it's been about 7 years since I was in the gym and doing higher intensity exercise. I was still getting movement in and doing more feminine movement, but I was afraid to go back to exercise because I was afraid of burnout. I was afraid that my adrenals would give out again. And I've recently found a program where it allows me to tune into my body and connect with, okay, what am I feeling emotionally? What am I feeling physically? And based on that, then I choose what style of exercise my body is wanting and needing that day. And then even checking in throughout the workout, like, how is my body feeling? Which I think we forget because we get so into, okay, I booked this workout and this is what the instructor is telling me to do. And this is what's going to get me the best results. And I don't know if people are still counting calories, but if they are, burn the most calories. I feel like that's pretty outdated, but perhaps they are. And so, yeah, I think this is also part of connecting with the feminine, is connecting with our intuition and listening to our bodies instead of just living from the neck up and living from our ego and from the busyness of our mind and what we're conditioned to do, how we are programmed, or what our autopilot is, rather than, okay, what does my body need today? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so let's dive into the cyclical living from the
Yeah.
feminine.
So I love this because it really ties into your work as well. I know that you do, women's circles, and um, a lot of this ties into ancient rituals where women and communities would gather on the new moon, the full moon. And I think that we can even just start there, understanding that these cycles are happening in nature all of the time. We've got the seasons, and then we've also got every single month, we've got a new moon and a full moon. And I never used to pay attention to new moon and full moon before and how that might be impacting my energy, or like what's going on outside of me. It was always like what's going on inside of me. So starting to connect with that more, I started to realize, oh, my menstrual cycle and many of my friends and clients' menstrual cycles were actually lining up with the new moon or the full moon, which is really beautiful if that happens. And I know that some women have irregular cycles or don't have a menstrual cycle anymore, and we can actually still tune into the new moon and full moon as this kind of guide of different cycles that we're in. So in the feminine way, I talk about our daily cycles, which is our 24-hour circadian rhythm, which is what we were just talking about, the adrenals, the stress hormones, our waking and sleeping cycles, getting in sync with those. Then also looking at our weekly cycles, looking at our exercise throughout the week, and then looking at our monthly cycles with our menstrual cycle and the moon cycles. And one of the things that I'd love to highlight today is talking about the different seasons within our menstrual cycles, because the more that we can get familiar with our menstrual cycles and understand them, the more we can work with them instead of against them. And there's so many reasons why, as women, we are disconnected from our cycles. There's a lot of shame around our menstrual cycles. There's a lot of messaging around, and a lot of women have been on birth control, or there's many ways in which we numb out or we ignore the signals of our menstrual cycle. And I think that we're just taught to push through it. Like, we're taught to just be like men and just push through it. But we are different at different phases of our cycle. And that's what I want to cover today. So you can kind of think of the full menstrual cycle. An average menstrual cycle is 28 to 31 days. And we can think of it as 4 different seasons. We've got the first season, which we would count as the menstruation. Then we've got the second season, which is follicular. Then the third season is ovulation. And the fourth is luteal. So in the first season being your menstruation, you can think of that as the winter season. During that season, we can invite in more slowness, more introspection, more quietness, more sensitivity. For me, what that looks like is taking a look at my calendar and marking on my calendar when I'm going to be starting my period, and looking at my week around that and making sure that I'm not overbooking my calendar, like planning around that, where I'm not going to book podcast interviews where I've got to be like on, or speaking engagements. I do my best not to. There's still times where it happens. But it's like, how can I actually adjust my schedule, whether that's your social schedule or your work schedule, to support that time of your menstrual cycle? Then we've got the spring season, which is follicular phase, and this is pre-ovulation. So this is where you might start having more inspiration, more creative ideas, feeling more energy, more action-oriented. I generally feel really alive during this time and start to be like, oh, I feel more like myself again. I'm like, there I am, out of the cave I've come. And then the next phase is ovulation. And this would be considered our summer season, which can often increase our sex drive. We can feel more sensual, more social, more outgoing. And this is where we actually want to take the most action towards the creative ideas that came through in the spring season. And then lastly, we have our luteal phase, which is kind of like, it is the fall, and it's this winding down phase where you might feel a little bit more tired, a little bit more moody. And this is where we start to bring in a little bit more stillness. You might be more hungry during this time. So thinking about like nourishing, warming foods and finding some more grounding in this time is a good way to go. And maybe even tuning into, instead of like creating and taking action, it's more learning and tuning into different types of wisdom that you want to receive. So that's kind of like the framework, and we can adjust, like we were talking about, our exercise, our sleep, our social schedule based on what's happening in our own menstrual cycle.
Yeah, it's been such a game changer of marking on my calendar, and just like, I just have a red block of like, this is when I'm going to start my period. And this is the time when I really should be clearing it out. And I was just on my period, last week. And I had a social date on Friday. And I was like, oh, nope, that's going to be the first day of my period. And so I said, I'm sorry, I need to, I need to reschedule, because I knew that that first day, like I really got to just be with myself. And otherwise I'm going to get burned out. Like if I overdo it on that first day when my energy is lowest.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I love this.
Yeah,
Mm.
and our body has so much wisdom and it is reminding us to slow down, but again, we override that so much, and that's where in time we get to a place like you shared where the injuries happen, or when we start to get sick or have chronic illness, things like that, because we're ignoring the messages. And in the past, I would say 4 or 5 years, the amount of times that I've actually gotten sick is far less than ever before in my life, because I've started to honor like when my body is giving me even those little signals of, oh, like my throat has, like my lymph nodes are a little bit inflamed, or I feel a little bit more tired. And usually it's like, well, I'll just bypass that. But the more that I listen to that and honor that, I don't get sick very often because I'm listening. And yeah, I don't think that we're as connected to that in this day and age.
Yeah. I think the place that I have really struggled, and this is what I realized is my responsibility, is within partnership.
Mm.
And so my husband would always say, oh, it's that time of the month. But in a really negative, something wrong with me
Mm.
type of way. And what I realized is it's not about him at all. It's, am I really setting the boundaries on my time, like canceling an appointment or canceling a social engagement, so that I can really be in sync with my cycle? And that decreases the impact on him.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like I used to be in this like, well, he knows, right? Like he should know. It's on the calendar.
Mm-hmm.
But it's actually up to me. And I think this is where we as women can be really empowered with this of how are we taking care of ourselves? How are we setting the boundaries to take care of ourselves? And it's really up to us. It's not up to our husbands to necessarily adjust, or our
Mm-hmm.
partners in that way. So yeah, that's the biggest thing for me around this.
Yeah, I love that. And it's so true when we're in relationship, like especially our intimate relationships are the ones that are most impacted by our mood and our energy. And that does not mean that you need to be like happy all of the time, or that you can't have times where you need more support, or where you have more emotions. But it's like, am I being so reactive because I'm overworked and burnt out? So it makes it a lot harder for your partner to be able to have compassion, because it's like the intensity of it is way more, right? And um, one of the things that I'm really appreciating in my partnership, and it is really unique because my partner has studied, he's very into physiology and the body, and he's worked with women in his own practices as a chiropractor and an exercise personal trainer, and he understands like the physiology behind it. And I think, most men don't get their periods, they don't know what it's like to have huge hormonal shifts. And yeah, I think for me, being with a partner who understands it, which again is very unique, is like I feel like I can be myself in all the different phases. And like you said, I'm communicating where I'm at. I'm taking care of myself during those times, which makes it a lot easier for him to support me.
Yes. So, ladies, full permission. I think it goes back to what you said earlier. We have permission to rest.
Mm-hmm.
And if not for you, you can do it for those around you. And that might feel a little counterintuitive, but really, I mean, that's what's going to then make your relationships better. So you're less reactive in your
Mm-hmm.
relationships when you give yourself that permission to rest.
Yes, 100%.
Yeah. Oh, so good. You had the book? with you?
I
You have a
have the
copy?
book. Yes.
Show us. It is so gorgeous.
Oh
Oh my
yeah. I
gosh.
know. I
Everyone
feel
was
like a
raving
mom.
about it.
I have so many friends who are having babies right now, and I'm like, I'm having a book baby, and I think it's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is really beautiful. I'm so happy with how it turned out. And like on the front of the book, it has this outline of like a fine line rose in gold, and then it's got the watercolors. And I feel like it's so symbolic of the divine feminine with also having that like structure and boundaries and yeah, it feels really nourishing to look at. So yeah, I'm very very grateful with how it turned out and feeling really excited for everyone to get a copy.
Yeah. So we've got the link in the show notes, and I have one. It's so good. You want to do a short little reading before we wrap?
Sure, we can do a reading. That sounds like fun. Let
It's
me
always
open
fun to
up
read from your own
here.
book.
Yes, it is really fun. I do love the live reading aspect. Let me find something in the cyclical living since that's
Yeah.
what we just talked about. Let's find that for us. Okay. All right. So the opening quote, I have quotes in every chapter, and the opening quote is by Andy Goldsworth, and he says, "We often forget that we are nature. Nature is not something separate from us. So when we say that we have lost our connection to nature, we've lost our connection to ourselves." Let's see
So good.
where we want to start here. Okay. Mother Nature is our guide. The concepts of slowing down, replenishing, and listening to our body's needs are highly undervalued and have been viewed as inconvenient or unproductive in our Western culture. We receive constant messages from society such as work hard, play hard, you can rest when you're dead, don't be so lazy, or push through the pain. Through these messages, we've learned to ignore the wisdom of our bodies and to disregard our fundamental need for rest and recovery. Many people walk around wearing their busyness and stress as a badge of honor, but in fact, it's an addiction. Staying busy helps them to stave off feelings of unworthiness, pain, and scarcity. This hyperproductive approach may work for a short time, but eventually it becomes unsustainable. Our continual dismissal of our cyclical nature has led to increasing rates of burnout, depression, anxiety, hormonal imbalances, and stress related physical health conditions. And as we've become increasingly disconnected from our personal rhythms and cycles, so too have we become disconnected from nature. Nature is never linear. It operates on a cyclical rhythm. It moves in seasons, rhythms, ebbs, and flows. So too does the feminine. We can look to Mother Nature as our greatest teacher of how to realign with our own cyclical nature.
Oh, so good. So, yeah,
Mm.
it's available on Amazon, and then we have the link in the show notes, so you could just click that. Ah, such incredible work that you're doing, Amy. I'm just so grateful that you are taking a stand for the feminine in this
Mm.
way and showing the way to so many women. So, what does it look like to really be a brave woman in living from the feminine way?
Mm. First, thank you so much. I just want to say how much like your support coming to my book launch event in San Diego and having me on the podcast feels so representative of the new paradigm of sisterhood and of when women show up in their power and it's not about this competition and it's really about like there's enough for everyone and we actually are better and stronger together. So, really, thank you for having me here. It's
Oh,
like an
yeah.
embodiment of the work that you teach as well. And yeah, for me, what it looks like to be a brave woman, I think that the bravest thing that we can do as women is to live as our authentic selves, to live in our authentic truth, and to not conform to the societal expectations and standards that have really kept us suppressed and playing small for so long. And when we're living as our authentic selves, what we're doing is we're saying, hey, even if it's scary, even if I'm afraid that other people are going to judge me, I'm still going to be me. And when we do that, it empowers other women to live in their power as well. So that's what I see as living as a brave woman is to do things differently, to do things that are in alignment with your soul and to be fully expressed in who you came here to be.
Yeah. And for us to be fully self expressed and be in our full radiance, living cyclically is so key. So thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and experience with us today, Amy. And thank you everyone for tuning in to the Brave Woman podcast. We'll see you next time.
You just listened to this show. I'd love for you to leave the Brave Woman podcast an honest review. Reviews help podcasts like this one grow, making it more possible for me to devote my time, energy, and money to its production. If you take a screenshot of your review and email it to support@sistershipcircle.com, we'll send you one of our archetype activations as a thank you gift. Thank you so much for your support. I really appreciate it.
Up next, how do you take care of your own needs and desires while being in relationship without being a self-centered narcissist? Join us for the final episode of season 4, where we'll discuss creating balance and alignment between the ego and the eco.